A tale of abominable terror and liberating authenticity. If you can read this story and not hear screamo metal coursing through your head at the end, I commend you. I, for one, cannot. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another short story discussion, which will appear in several playlists on the channel. Number one being the short story discussion playlist. Number two, the H.P. Lovecraft playlist. Number three, Horror Fest 2024. 31 horror genre videos in 31 days on the channel in celebration of October 2024. And the horror genre playlist as well. The short story in question today is The Outsider, and we are here by request. So thank you for requesting this short story. Now, this video will have a So What Happened to Lit Crit and a Writer's Corner portion. So, what happened? Our speaker does not remember where he was born, but he knows it was a castle. An ancient castle with lots of creepy places and dark corners. And one very, very creepy high tower. That's where he finds himself now. And books are how our narrator knows anything at all, not from interaction. But he has hope. I say he. We'll get back to this. Someday he will be among people, crowds of people. He feels it in his bones. Well, he has hope until he doesn't. And he dreams of climbing up the creepy tower and jumping out. The problem is, the stairs don't go all the way to the turret. So you have to get to the place where the stairs stop and then climb the bricks the rest of the way by nook and cranny. But our narrator decides that's exactly what he's going to do and climbs the rest of the way he climbs the rest of the way up the turret, or up to the turret, pardon me, I'm losing my words right now, but at the top, he finds a bunch of oblong boxes, and in true terror fashion, the scariest part of this story, our narrator realizes that among those boxes, there is an Amazon vest, and now he works for Amazon. Just terrible. How terrifying could that be? No, but he does find a stone with a strange chiseling in it and a doorway. He pushes it open and is overcome with ecstasy. But when he goes through the door, instead of staring down at treetops, he thinks he's going to be staring down at the top of the forest so he can jump out, he finds that he is at ground level. In the distance, there is another castle, and he makes his way toward it, crawls through the window, and all of the people inside stare toward him in shock and awe before bolting and leaving the room. Our narrator is left to wonder what is behind him, so he starts searching around the room looking for whatever that nightmarish thing was, and in one of the corners, he is shocked and loses his balance. He's shocked by something nightmarish in that corner, loses his balance, and starts to fall into the thing before stretching his hand out, only to see the thing in the corner stretch its hand out at the very same time, and they touch. Our narrator is so disgusted that he flees the castle back to where he came from. Sometime, somewhere, in the midst of this flight, he realizes that the thing he reached out and touched was the smooth surface of polished glass, meaning it was a mirror. He had seen and touched himself, meaning he was that ghastly thing. And then he flies around with the other spirits at the end. Now, this is very, very interesting. So I found the story itself a little bit cumbersome, a little bit hard to read. This was, in my opinion, this was my second H.P. Lovecraft story, and I thought that it was more difficult than The Ghost Eater to read. Perhaps that was the influence of C.M. Eddy, Is that who it was? The second writer for The Ghost Eater. But this short story was a little bit more cumbersome to read. However, I think there's a lot more literary depth here than in that other short story. First, we open with a quote from Keats. The quote itself says, "That night the Baron dreamt of many a woe, and all his warrior guests with shade form of witch and demon and large coffin worm were long benightmared." That is from a poem called The Eve of St. Agnes, and St. Agnes was the patron saint of virgins and was martyred in the 300s in Rome. That's an interesting idea with which to start this short story. Why would we start there? Maybe H.P. Lovecraft just liked the quote. The poem is about, however, passion and seeking love/seeking meaning. The medieval legend is, also involved in that poem is the medieval legend that a young woman will prophesy the man that she marries through a dream. The poem quoted to start this short story says that a young woman, a young virgin, will prophesy who she marries by dreaming about that young man. Or old man, who knows? It's prophecy. After this, we have a quote in the short story. I can't find it. I couldn't go back and find it for some reason, but the narrator themselves dreams about the moon. Is this the prophecy of the narrator dreaming about to whom they will be married? Notice I'm switching genders now with the pronouns as we talk, because I think there is evidence. I'm going to get to something in a moment, but dreaming about the moon, marrying the moon, is to be a spirit of the night, is to be, perhaps, a wicked spirit. That is an interesting quirk here, but who is our narrator? I think it is maybe default to read this story and believe that this is a male narrator. We often do not see women cast in this light. And I believe the only inference we have to this is in the very first line, "Unhappy is he to whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness. Wretched is he who looks back upon the lone hours and vast dismal blah, 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 blah." However, prior to the sort of English language that we have inherited today, if you were speaking in vast generalities, if you were speaking about people in large swaths, if you were speaking about a hypothetical person, normally you just used the pronoun he. So if you were talking about hypothetical people who are the most unhappy, it would be unhappy is he to whom. It would not be unhappy are they. It would not be unhappy is she. If this was a hypothetical person, you would just use the phrase he. It would just be the default of the language. So I don't know that we have any other indicator during this poem, or during this short story, that our speaker, our narrator, our main character is male. This may be a woman that has come back from the dead. And in fact, the next point I have here, hear me out. So, but also, the marriage to the moon, the reference to St. Agnes, this might not be a gendered argument at all. What it might be is an argument about virginity. Our speaker here seems to be a virgin to the night, seems to be a virgin to those things which make a ghoul, boys and ghouls. seems to be a virgin to those things which make a spirit, a ghost, a ghost. And it is not until that moment at the end that we would consider our narrator to be experienced, right? But if we are talking about virginity, if we are talking about vague references to sexuality, there is some of the most Freudian stuff going on here. And listen, we start with a quote from an ode to virgins. Virgin is a sexual reference. It is in reference to whether or not one has had sex. The big test of the story, when our narrator decides to change their life, what is it that they go and do? They go and start crawling up a giant shaft. They are rubbing their body against a giant shaft. That tower on the castle is phallic shaped. In addition, castles are protection. Protection long associated with masculinity. So, our narrator decides to change their life after opening with a quote about virginity, goes and rubs their body along a giant shaft that represents protection, that represents masculinity. They climb all the way to the top of this phallic symbol, and at the top of this phallic symbol there is a turret, something that is slightly bigger, slightly more round than the shaft beneath it. And upon entry, our narrator is overcome with ecstasy. Afterward, the narrator feels ugly and alone at the end of this experience. Through the journey up the shaft, through the journey that leads to ecstasy, after going and making their way towards an unknown place, this secondary castle, our narrator is left with an experience that leaves them feeling alone and leaves them feeling ugly. If this is not, or at least self-conscious, before deciding this is the new way, when our narrator leaves that castle, they decide this is the new way of life. I am now comfortable being me. If this is not a sexual metaphor, I don't know what is. If this is not a sexual metaphor, I am completely lost. The next thing I want to talk about here is, so I think that is one interpretation of this short story, those three together. But another interpretation of this short story is to be had here. Our narrator starts the story alone and is longing for the other. Our narrator starts the story alone, and the big deciding factor in this short story towards our narrator taking action in their own life / afterlife, and making movement within what it means to be them, the change for our narrator, for our main character, is they decide they don't want to be alone. They conclude that probably that's not in the cards, so I'm going to go and self-delete. However, they decide they don't want to be alone, and longing for other is what motivates them. They conclude that the real answer is self-destruction. Okay, so starting with this uprising in the heart towards others, deciding if that's not in the card, I'm going to self-destruct. They then try to self-destruct and find themselves around other people, the original want. Then the other people, flee in terror and disgust at what our narrator is. Then our narrator ultimately seems to recognize and embrace what they are. Our narrator at the beginning was not authentic, was sort of formless. Our narrator went out into the world, figured out what they really were, and embraces it at the end. This is ultimately freeing, figuring out what they are, despite the fact that what they are is ghastly, despite the fact that what they are is nightmarish. Our narrator finds this knowledge ultimately freeing. And this leads to the phrase in the short story, quote, "Now I ride with the mocking and friendly ghouls on the night wind," end quote. Now they have authenticity. Through authenticity, our narrator finds their real community. Isn't that incredible? Our narrator starts wanting community, decides they can't find community. They're going to self-destroy. Goes to self-destroy, figures out they can't do it, literally can't, not decides not to, literally can't. They get to the place where self-destruction might happen and realize there's no there. Then they find other people. They're treated very badly, figuring out in the process who they really are. Then they know the authenticity of the self. They are then free. They started shackled. They started the short story confined. With knowledge of self, the spirit, the ghoul, is freed. With knowledge of authenticity, the spirit is freed, and then finds the community that the spirit wanted to begin the story. That is a beautiful turn. That is a remarkable turn from H.P. Lovecraft here. So, on to the writer's corner. I have one writer's corner note for this short story. Do we gain anything from the extreme amount of lack of detail besides mystery? There is a great mystery at the beginning, but I think we can all acknowledge this opening paragraph is a bit rough if you're talking about connecting with a short story. Unhappy is he whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness. Wretched is he who looks back upon lone hours in vast and dismal chambers with brown hangings and maddening rows of antique books, or upon odd watches in twilight groves of grotesque, gigantic, and vine-encumbered trees that silently wave twisted branches far aloft. Such a lot of the gods gave to me, the dazed and disappointed, the barren, the broken, and yet I am strangely content and cling desperately to those sere memories when my mind momentarily threatens to reach beyond to the other. I'm not saying it's poorly written. I'm saying that you've got no purchase on this world from that opening paragraph. I'm saying that it is very difficult to get anywhere from there. Now, H.P. Lovecraft gets there, but could we have a more enjoyable story from H.P. Lovecraft if there were more tangible detail early in this short story? You don't have to kill the mystery to give the reader somewhere to sit. You give the reader somewhere to sit in the short story, and all of a sudden they're more grounded. Somewhere to sit in that short story could be so simple as, instead of opening the short story with the phrase that we open with, "Unhappy is he whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness," What if you, so it's got a little less pop, but what if you open this short story flipping through the pages of a book? Then you build connection with your reader through the fact that your narrator is reading. It doesn't pop you in the face, but it's also a lot more grounded. It's also some place that the reader can take purchase in the story and exist for a moment before you're throwing philosophical ideas at them. Starting, in my opinion, stories with sort of philosophical statements is a very big gamble. Ultimately, H.P. Lovecraft brings it back around, but in my reading experience, it was a rough start. That is all I have for this short story. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, so consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more literature in the future. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.